And now the weather. Expect partly cloudy skies with an excellent chance of maximum refunds. Wait, that can't be right.
Oh, but it is.
Who are you?
I'm April, and we could see refunds raining down all tax season with people switching to TaxAct.
TaxAct?
The tax filing software that makes it easy to file for less and get more.
New forecast. It's sunny days ahead for everyone using TaxAct.
Always happy to brighten your day.
TaxAct.
Switch to TaxAct today and start for free.
See taxact.com for details.
Hello, and welcome back to What's Up Doc, the documentary review podcast. I am your host, Gemma Delaney, and as always, you can find us on all of the major social media platforms. We're at What's Up Doc Pod. You can find us on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook. Give us a like, give us a review, give us a share. But guys, so we're on episode 4 of season 2, and today we're going to be talking about a documentary, a little known documentary, well, I hadn't heard of it anyway, called White Boy. This one it's not new. It was actually released in 2017, but it is new to Netflix. And Netflix, God love them, knowing me so well, had sent, we think you'll like this. I love when they do that. And I was like, do you? And I stuck it on, and I did. I really enjoyed this one. So we stuck it on a few nights ago, White Boy, not really knowing what it was about or what to expect. So, I mean, look, I had heard of White Boy. I'm assuming a lot of you will have as well. That name would be mentioned in a lot of rap artists' lyrics. So I kind of, when I say I'd heard of White Boy, I knew that he was some kind of urban legend, notorious kind of, I don't know, gangster, drug dealer from like the 80s, from kind of, the golden era. Is that the right term? I don't know. But kind of the golden era of, the drugs scene in America, where they were going around in the big cars and the fast women and fast cars and all that jazz. So I had heard of the name in that kind of capacity, but I didn't really know anything else about him or his story. So I suppose I was kind of just expecting a little biopic of like a one-time bigwig kingpin. Kingpin? What's a kingpin? A kingpin. Jesus, Gemma. But yeah, that's kind of what I expected. But it's not that at all. God, I was really surprised actually. As well, I should say, I remembered that there was a film released. It was last year or the year before about him. And it was kind of pretty much panned. It didn't do very well. I don't think it even broke even. I think it took it was like 30 million to make or something. Made 25 million. Peanuts. But you know what I mean? It didn't even make back what they put into it. But yeah, other than that, I didn't really know the whole story, and like this was really fucking interesting. So I suppose I didn't really know what to expect, but the promo for the documentary definitely alluded to some kind of corruption in America. What? Some kind of corruption, and it kind of alluded to the fact that maybe White Boy was innocent. So I was definitely intrigued because the promo that's on Netflix, if you've seen it, it's kind of, what would it remind you of? Kind of Making a Murderer-esque, I guess, that, right, okay, he's done something, but there's definitely some police corruption going on there, exacerbating the problem and heightening it. Oh, I can't talk today. What is wrong with me? Heightening the problem, but yeah, kind of exacerbating it and making it seem worse, that what he did was worse than what it actually was. So I had a lot of questions going into this. I was definitely intrigued to find out what was the real story, or at least what is the real story as it is being put across in this documentary. So do a little synopsis just for those of you who were like myself and didn't really know a whole lot about White Boy. White Boy was a guy called Rick Wershey, who was arrested in 1987, same year I was born, so this is well before my time. He was 17 at the time, and he was arrested for cocaine possession. So at the time, America was having its war on drugs. So if you're, based at the American side of the pond, you'll probably be aware of that whole narrative and that whole episode in American history. It's not so well known over here. I certainly wouldn't remember the war on drugs. Like I said, I was only born the same year all this shit was going down. So, but I know of it, I suppose, through my love of documentaries. I've watched several documentaries on the topic, and that's why I'm aware of it. But it was this massive thing in America in the, I'm going to say, late 70s and all through the 80s and probably even into the early 90s, where they had this massive war on drugs, where the government was just going gung-ho. If you were found in possession of drugs, you were going down. So white boy Rick was arrested at 17 for cocaine possession. And because of the stringent laws surrounding drugs and drug possession at the time, he was sentenced to life without parole. Which seems really fucking harsh, because it's not like oh God, but it's not like he killed someone. Like, I know indirectly, look, before you start getting on me, drugs, and I know it's a bigger concept and a bigger scheme in the grand scheme of things, and but I mean, he's not directly actually putting a gun to somebody's head and killing them. So life without parole seems a little bit excessive, but then you find out why. And I love when a documentary does that. I love the big reveal in this documentary. It's great. And I certainly didn't see it coming, but he's sentenced to life without the possibility of parole because of the war on drugs at the time. There was this law in place whereby there was a name on it. The 650 lifer law, I want to say. I think it was the 650 or the 650 lifer law. But basically what it was that if you were in possession of a substance in the amount of 650 grams or more, you were going to prison for life without the possibility of parole. So basically, we're trying to scare people out of selling or having drugs in their possession. And yeah, so that's basically what happened to white boy Rick, and that's how he is now in prison. And here we are, 3 decades later, and the guy is still in prison. But yeah, I suppose that would be seen very excessive for a non-violent offence and a non-violent offender. And then, in this documentary as well, it just reiterates that this guy is non-violent, and then that through his incarceration, he has been a model prisoner. Literally hasn't set a foot wrong. And so that's the big question, I guess, that the documentary is trying to answer. Why is white boy Rick 3 decades later still in prison? And like I said, that's the big reveal. And that's what I loved about this documentary, because it's only like an hour and 22 minutes long or something like that. And I'm not being bad, but sometimes you do get fucked off of these documentary series where they just drag the absolute bejesus out of a story into a story that can be told in an hour and a half or 2 hours is dragged out into a 6-parter or 7-part or 8-part or whatever. And you just lose the will to live halfway through. And I think I actually said as much about Tiger King in the last episode. It was definitely an episode or two too long. It just didn't need to go into the level of detail. But they're just trying to, make the most out of the story and absolutely bleed it dry. But I liked about this documentary is that it's not even an hour and a half long. And it gets all the information in, and it's such a captivating story, and it just flies by, and you never feel the time dragging, and you're just like, oh, when the reveal happens, you're like, fuck, tell me more, this is amazing. So what is the reveal? The reveal is that not so far into this documentary either, which I like. I wouldn't even say we get in halfway. I'd say it's about a quarter of the way through. The big reveal is that things are not what they seem. That white boy Rick isn't. He's Rick. He was never known as white boy. This was a whole thing concocted by the media, by the police, to, basically paint him as this drugs kingpin when he was anything but, and incarcerate him for the last 30 years because the man simply knows too much. And you think to yourself, what could a 17-year-old in 1987 know? that, he needed to be locked up. Well, it turns out he was an informant for the FBI, recruited for the FBI and by the FBI. And not only that, but he is the youngest FBI informant in history. He was recruited at 14, which is not only just, amazing, and when the reveal happens, you're like, what the fuck? But also, it's all kinds of illegal. You can't recruit a child to work for you. And not only that, but put a child in harm's way, put a child in danger by actively encouraging them to get involved with hardened gangs and hardened gang members and put their lives at risk. Because imagine what would have happened to this fucking guy if he was found out. So that is the twist in this documentary, is that we find out that he was actually recruited by the FBI as an informant. And then, initially, and if you're like me, you'll always be a little bit skeptical. And I was like, fuck off. Yeah, you are. This is the story you're telling to try and get yourself a release from prison. But he's got the proof. He's got the proof to back it up. And they're not denying it. The FBI aren't denying it either. And yeah, so that's a really interesting bit in the documentary. So you find out that basically he was, is recruited the right word? It's like, it seems more like grooming, doesn't it? It seems like what a pedophile nearly would do. Like 14, like how much cop on can you actually have at 14? If you think about it. So yeah, he was groomed by the FBI at 14 to become an informant, and encouraged to become a drug dealer so that he could infiltrate, the city's biggest gangs. This all takes place in Detroit, by the way, if I haven't already stated that. And Detroit, obviously, as we know, massive epicenter for crime and drugs and all that kind of thing. So yeah, he was encouraged to do this and infiltrate these gangs, so that he could provide the FBI with intel. And then, how he does that is explained in the documentary as well, because you're like, this is a little scrawny, 14-year-old white fella, and all these gangs are predominantly black. Like, how does he even gain their trust? And like I said, the documentary explains that. So it explains that Rick is kind of reared in a predominantly black neighborhood. It is a violent neighborhood. It is a crime-ridden neighborhood. And so these aren't just, he's not coming from the well-to-do suburbs, with mummy and daddy, and then, trying, oh, hello, I want to join a gang. It's not like that. He is living on the same street. He's living across the road from a lot of these drug dealers. He's living in an impoverished part of the city. They know him to see him. They've known him his whole life. So they've no reason to believe that he is an informant, and they've every reason to believe that, he genuinely does want to become a part of these gangs and live the lifestyle and get the money and get the women. And he's young. He's at that age where I suppose people do decide the route they're going to go down, whether they're, going to stick with education, all that, or they're going to go, fuck this. This guy is selling drugs and he has the lifestyle of, rich and famous people, so I'm going to go down this route. So, it wasn't such a massive leap for them to believe that he did want to do this. And as well, it explains that his dad would get them guns. What do you got? Like a gun runner? Am I using the right? So white. Am I even using the right terminology? I do not know. But that's what his dad did. So that was Richard Sr. He was a gun runner, I'm going to call him. So he would get the guns that they required. He would get the, the silencers, the ammo, the grenades, whatever the fuck the gangs needed, he could get and provide. And, under the table as well. There was no documentation, there was no papers, there was no paper trail ever leading back to them. So they could get all of the guns and weapons and armory that they needed, as they would need to do, arm themselves up for rival gangs without being detected. So the documentary then kind of goes on to explain that obviously, at 14 becomes this informant and encouraged to be a dealer, and then he's providing the FBI with intel. Not only is he providing the FBI with intel, but like this information is so crucial to their war on drugs that, like, they said at one stage there was like 12 or 13 raids in the one day based off the intel that Rick was able to give them. So, I mean, this guy was absolutely crucial in the war they were fighting on drugs. So you would imagine then he would be treated accordingly. You would imagine that he would, get his just desserts. And he did to some extent. He was paid handsomely. And by his own admission, a 14-year-old with thousands and thousands of dollars, he didn't know himself. And spent it accordingly, spent it, as frivolously as you would expect a 14 to spend it. But what happens then is it is discovered that he's underage. So what they're saying is that they didn't know he was underage. And they discovered he was underage, and that's why he was cast aside. Whereas what ends up turning out to be the truth and what ends up turning out to be the case is that there was no discovery. They were fully aware of the fact that he was underage, and because he was underage, they were actually filing all of the information that he divulged to them under his father's name so that they could get away with it. So yeah, there's no discovery. They know he's underage, and how they are getting this through is by saying that it's not Richard Jr., it's Richard Sr. who's given us this information. But whoever discovers, the power that be discovers that they are using a juvenile, an underage informant, the shit hits the fan, and they say, you've got to cut him loose. This could get us in serious shite. So they cut him loose. And what happens then, this is like 2 years later, so Rick is like 16 at this stage. So at this stage, he has dropped out of school, and he knows nothing but a life of crime. He knows nothing but running with these drug gangs. These are his friends now, as was actively encouraged by the FBI. And like, there's even scenes in the documentary where like he talks about how the FBI would like, he'd be like, oh, I can't go out tonight, I have homework to do. And they were like, you better fucking go out, fuck your homework, fuck school, And he'd be like, oh, I have school in the morning, I can't. And they would be making him stay out till like 3 and 4 to get this information. So it's not just like they were like, oh, look, if you can, in your own time, and you're free, you've got a little bit of free time. They were kind of threatening him, and he's a kid, So they cut him loose after 2 years, and all he has known up until this point is how to make money off drugs. And he's now out of education. What happens, do you reckon? So, like, he continues what he knows. He continues selling drugs. So, at 16, they cut him loose, but he continues selling drugs, but not with the backing of the FBI anymore. But unfortunately, he is upsetting some high-ranking people, and he knows too much. So who's he upsetting? Well, Detroit is a very corrupt city. I keep saying this season, but like every documentary review I'm doing, it's like, what have we learned? America's corrupt. Well, it's no different this time, I'm afraid, folks. We're not learning anything, different either. It's the same fucking message we're learning in this documentary. We find out, and I don't want to give too much away because I'm hoping you'll go out, if you haven't already watched this, go out this weekend and watch it. Because it is it's a belter, like. But you find out that the mayor, the brother of the mayor, and several police officers are actually arrested off the back of information that White Boy Rick provides. So he knows a lot. He knows too much. He knows things that could get a lot of important people in trouble. He knows of people turning a blind eye to criminal activity because family members are involved or they are profiting from it. And it lays all of this out very clearly in the documentary. And I mean, it's not even far-fetched. It's very much like it's people's brothers, people's wives, people's, yeah. And there's then in the documentary as well, there's interviews with the people who you'd imagine wouldn't be speaking up for White Boy Rick, but I guess 30 years has passed at this stage. People who would have been his enemies back in the day, as in rival drug gangs and that kind of thing. And they're kind of going, look, the man is, he's done a lot of time for a non-violent offence. He should be out by now. Like, yeah, I tried to kill him back in the day. And like, that's literally what it is. They're talking to this guy who was hired to kill White Boy Rick, and he's like, look, I was hired by the police, the FBI, to do it, to get him out of the way because he knew too much. And then they're talking to a guy who I don't know if he's still actively involved in that lifestyle, but at the time, Johnny Curry, and I mean, I'd heard of that name. He was like the cocaine king at that time. And he even speaks up for him, and I think it goes into it in bigger detail, but again, I don't want to give too much about the documentary away, but he's talking about how White Boy was riding his wife behind his back, and even he's like, look, water under the bridge, like the man's done his time, he needs to be released. Do you know what I mean? So these are people who've really no reason to speak up for him, other than the fact that they truly believe that the man has done his time and that, like, Jesus, enough is enough. And I suppose as well, it's a thing of like, is he still, or does he still, I suppose, have the capability of creating such a furore within the FBI? Does he still know outstanding information that could potentially damage people? But it seems like he does. So, yeah. Basically, it's that the man knows too much, and that this is the reason he's been kept in prison, and it's nothing to do. He was never a kingpin. He was never this big drug dealer. He was never a hustler. He never ran a gang. But the newspapers of the time would have led you to believe very much that he was, and it shows those articles as well, and it shows, the terminology that's used referring to Rick, and so you can understand why the general public believe the same as well. And I mean, general public, I'm guilty of that as well. I said at the head of the documentary, what I knew about this was that he was this drug kingpin from back in the day, and we're been told no, he wasn't. He was a kid, and probably had a background in some petty criminality, but like nothing major, but was sold down the river, and this narrative was sold so that he would be in prison, so that he could be put away, so that he wouldn't be believed as well, that he was actually an FBI informant, and that he did a lot of good work. But unfortunately, he then got involved with the wrong people and knew too much, and because of the level of corruption in Detroit, it was what it was, or was what it is. I don't know if it still is corrupt over there, but yeah, just basically saying that's why he has suffered and served this excessively long prison time. So, I mean, look, there's a lot I like about this, obviously. It's really Rick versus the government, Rick versus the man. I think probably my favourite parts, the reveal obviously is just absolutely, it's brilliant when it happens. Like I said, I didn't see it coming, but also I loved the fact of who they interview throughout the course of this documentary and who they got on board. And I'd love to know how they got him on board. Like I said, Johnny Curry, who would have been a rival, well, they would have been in cahoots before White Boy was imprisoned, but when he was imprisoned then, I mean, they were mortal enemies. And I think I could be mistaken, it could be someone else, I think he hired a hit on him as well, ordered a hit on White Boy as well. I keep calling him White Boy, it's this name that was invented for him basically by the police and by the media. He never had it prior to his arrest, is what the documentary is saying. But yeah, I love that they were able to get Johnny Curry on board, who would have just been this, like I said, the cocaine king in Detroit back in those times, and that he's talking about the level of wealth they had, and just talking about the level of corruption, and talking about his own belief that the man has done his time now and should be released. I also loved when they interviewed the hitman, And again, I guess, 30 years have passed and they're like, we've got nothing to lose. We might as well talk about this shit. We're not going to get done for it now. So those were the bits I really, really enjoyed about the documentary. I feel like I'm saying this so much. What did I learn from this documentary? I learned that America is fucking corrupt. Like, it's just so sad, I guess, that this guy was trying to do the right thing. He was trying to help out the FBI, and then, like, he was a baby. He was 17. He wasn't even, like, you're not legal in America till you're 21, but he wasn't even legal over here where, we're 18. It's crazy that he was tried as an adult. But it's because of this law that they had in. So yeah, I just thought that was insane. God, this is a bit of a spoiler. Just in terms of, I suppose, what surprised me post the documentary and, me doing the little bit of research that I always like to do outside of just watching the documentary. So spoiler alert, if you're going to watch the documentary, you might want to turn off the podcast at this point and maybe dip back in them when you have watched it. But he is not yet released from prison, so he's still in. And like I said, this documentary was released in 2017, so we're 3 years later and the man's not free. He's meant to be getting released in August. That's the most recent information that I could find. What also, blew me away was the whole thing about him being the youngest informant in history. Jesus, I think that's a better accolade, or that's a cooler accolade to have than being like a drug lord, that he was the youngest informant for the FBI in history. And the fact that he wasn't white boy, as it were, that this was just a whole persona that was fucking made up. But isn't it just insane what people can do? Like, whatever, we've seen documentaries time and time again about them doing to adults, but I think that's what really blew my mind about this, is that he's a fucking kid, and it shows obviously the archive footage of him in the jail cell, and he just looks like a scared little chap, and like, he's young looking. He doesn't look older. He doesn't look macho. He doesn't look like this, notorious drug lord that you'd be frightened of. He just looks like a scared little boy, and his fringe is hanging down in his eyes, and it's all of that information was a massive surprise to me. And I think anybody who would have heard of the legend of White Boy, but like me, you don't really, you hear what you hear and go, what's that? Right. And somebody tells you, he was this drug fella from back in the day. You're like, all right. That I didn't know that, that was never his nickname. He was never referred to that until he was arrested. That he never rang a gang. That he, was, very small time really, and it was just all amped up to get a conviction. And that he was brought into this life of crime by the FBI. So those were the surprising aspects of the documentary for me, I think. The drawbacks of the documentary, I suppose, like, for full transparency, and again, it's something I only learned because I then turned around and did a bit of research post watching it. But yeah, just for balance, it kind of fails to mention that, right, fair enough, he wasn't what the FBI set him up to be, but like, he wasn't a fucking angel either. And it kind of annoys me when documentaries do that. I think for balance, they should always, you should show the two sides. Like, he definitely did have a history of petty crime. He was into robbing, and he was into, carjacking and that kind of thing. And, at 14, he actually chased someone. He, like, 14, way below the legal age to drive. But I think it was his grandparents' car or his parents' car that he took. And his sister was driving her own car, and I don't know where they were going, but they stopped in at a gas station, and he left the keys in the car and went inside for something. And then the car was robbed, and he runs out, hops into the car with his sister. They chase them, and he lets off like 2 rounds before being pulled over by the police. So, like, he wasn't a fucking angel either. Like, he may not have been this drug lord, but definitely had a penchant for crime. And I suppose that is kind of directly linked to the fact the area that he was from, and didn't have a particularly good upbringing, and kind of brought up in an impoverished area and all that. But there should be a little bit more of that just for balance, I do think. But I mean, look, I'm nitpicking. I would absolutely recommend this documentary. Like I said, it's not even an hour and a half long. It is just absolutely, it's just insane. And like I said, I think it's because I've seen it before with adults. I've seen the corruption, and I've seen people been, you know, sold up the river for, you know, the sake of the police getting what they want. But I don't think I've ever seen a documentary about a kid, with exception of maybe, you know, Central Park 5 or something like that. So maybe that's what did it. But yeah, would I recommend this documentary? Absolutely. It's brilliant. I think like online, on like Google recommends, it got like 95% or something. So, you know, I'm not in the minority. People who have seen this documentary have actively enjoyed it as well. And like I said, it's released on Netflix now, so there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't give it a gander. It's White Boy, and yeah, I definitely recommend it. So guys, that brings us to the end of this podcast. Look, if you have any further thoughts on White Boy, if you have seen it yourself, please let us know. So like I said, you can interact with us on all of our social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter at What's Up Doc Pod. And guys, as always, I have been your host, Gemma Delaney. We will see you next time. Take it easy, guys. Bye bye.